Good day, and again, welcome to assessment of the fetal status using the cardiotocograph. I'm still Anna Nolte, and today we are going to start with lesson 5, which is the interpretation of the normal cardiotocograph. Now, you had to pass your quiz for lesson 4 to be able to be here, but I really hope that lesson 4 and all the physiological changes made sense to you, because we are going to use it a lot in the interpretation of the normal CTG. So in this part, we're going to talk about the baseline of the fetal heart rate and the baseline variability. In part 2, we will talk about the accelerations and decelerations and the contractions, and also a little bit about antepartum fetal heart interpretations. Now, when we look at the interpretation of a normal CTG, there are always certain features that we look at. When we look at the fetal heart, there are some 4 very important aspects: the baseline, the variability, the baseline variability, and then the presence of accelerations or decelerations, or combined we call them the presence of periodic changes. From period to period, there are some accelerations or there are some decelerations. And then also we look at the contractions. And as I've said in one of the previous lessons, it is so important that you always try your very best to get a good recording of the uterine contractions as well, because it's almost impossible to correctly interpret the fetal heart without a good tracing of the uterine contractions as well. Now, if we look at the basal heart rate, that's basically, in very short, the average heart rate of the fetus. And it's between periodic changes. So it will be between accelerations or between decelerations. Now here you can see there was basically a line drawn through the average of the fetal heart to give you the basal heart rate, or we can also talk about the baseline heart rate. Now, if we look at the normal baseline heart rate, a normal heart rate is between 110 to 160 beats per minute over a 10-minute period. Now, there's a little bit of a controversy about the bottom value of the normal baseline heart rate. In this case that we have here, 110. Some criteria use 120 and some criteria use 100. And when we get to the different guidelines, we will come to this again and talk about it again. What is very important is that in the case of a post-date fetus, the fetal heart rate is much slower. In premature babies, the fetal heart rates are usually much higher here in the average of 150, even just below 160 beats per minute. But we often get post-date fetuses of 41 to 42 weeks gestation, where we get a normal fetal heart rate of 110 beats per minute. What is very important if we have a lower heart rate, and we will come back to that again, is that there should be good variability, and if there are accelerations as well, we're very happy. So a fetal heart rate above 160 is being called tachycardia, and below 110 is being called bradycardia. Now, how do we determine the basal heart rate or the baseline heart rate? As we've said, the definition says it's an average heart rate between periodic changes. Now here you see acceleration, and here you see an acceleration. So it will be a baseline heart rate between these two accelerations and these two accelerations, and we've said over 10 minutes. And the easiest is, like what we've done on the previous slide, is to just draw a line. And it's quite okay if you do it, especially in the beginning when you're a beginner and you analyze fetal heart rates, to draw a line, even if you draw a line on the CTG paper, to make it just clearer for yourself to determine the fetal heart rate. And here you can see we've said we use these columns of numbers to determine the fetal heart rate. Here is 100, 120, and here is 140. So in this case, this baseline heart rate is 140 beats per minute, which is obviously a normal fetal heart rate. Here's another example where we again drew a line over a 10-minute period. This is a 10-minute period. There are some accelerations here present. So we drew a line again through the average part of the fetal heart, and we come here to a fetal heart rate of 150 beats per minute. Here's 120, there's 140 there. There's 160 there, so here between 140 and 160 is obviously 150 beats per minute. So this normal basal heart rate or baseline heart rate is 150 beats per minute. Now that brings us to the second characteristic of the fetal heart rate or the fetal heart, and that's baseline variability. And the name tells us, and we have talked about it a little bit before during the physiology slides, and that tells us that the baseline of the fetal heart rate varies all the time. It varies below and above the baseline, and that's what we call bandwidth. And we have said that is due to the interaction between the sympathetic and the non-sympathetic or the parasympathetic nervous system. We determine it also over a 10-minute period. We just keep into consideration what we've talked earlier about the quiescence and the activity periods, which we will come to again. But we determine the difference between the highest peak and the lowest trough of the fluctuation between accelerations and decelerations. And I'll show you just now. And a normal is between 5 to 25 beats per minute. Okay, if we now need to determine the baseline variability, we've said it's the difference between the highest peak of the fetal heart and the lowest peak of the fetal heart between periodic changes. Now here we see some accelerations, so we need to determine between what and what does the fetal heart rate here fluctuates. So here we see where my cursor is now. Let me just put my cursor there for you. Where my cursor is now is 140 beats per minute. And there we see is 160 beats per minute. So here the fetal heart rate fluctuates about 20 beats per minute. Here we have also 140 and then it goes up to about 150 there. So here it fluctuates 10 beats per minute and here it fluctuates 15 beats per minute. So if we want to determine the variability here, we can take the average of these three measurements, 20 plus 10 is 30, plus 15 is 45, and divided by 3 gives us an average variability of 15 beats per minute. In the next slides, I will show you how we determine the bandwidth of the difference between the higher and the lower rates of the fetal heart rate. And that, according to me, is a much easier way to determine the variability of the fetal heart rate. And here you can see it on this slide. If one literally draws a line at the bottom of the fetal heart here and at the top of the fetal heart there, then it's very easy for us to see the bandwidth between what the fetal heart rate varies here. And here you can see there's 120 here, there's 130. So this is just above 130. There's 140, so it's just above 40 beats per minute. So it's more or less 10, the variability is more or less 10 beats per minute. And as I'm saying, this to me makes it so much more easier and more simple to determine the variability. And that's usually when students struggle to determine the variability, that's usually how I teach them to do it. And again, like I've said, with drawing a line to determine the baseline, again, especially when you are inexperienced, there's absolutely nothing wrong with drawing the two lines on a CTG graph when you do interpret the CTG. Here you can see again, if you want to draw a line here, there's 140 and your line will almost go here at the top of my cursor there. And then if you draw a line here at the top, it will be more or less at 150 beats per minute. So our variability in this case is 10 beats per minute. Okay, then another aspect of variability that we have talked about previously is cycling, where we've said that the fetus have sleep periods, which we call quiescence periods, where we have a decrease in variability, and then we have an active period where we have increase in a normal variability and also accelerations. Now, this reflective, we've said that happens in a normal functioning normal central nervous system. There's nothing, absolutely nothing wrong with the fact that there's decreased variability here. This period can last anything from 30 to 50 minutes. So as I've said previously, when we do have a period where there's a decreased variability, it's just important to do the CTG, to keep the CTG machine and let the graph run a little bit longer so that we can make 100% sure whether this is due to a fetus that sleeps or a fetus or other reasons for decreased variability, like, for example, hypoxia. There are different ways and different recipes on how one can try and wake up a fetus if we have a quiet pattern. Often it just helps to palpate the fetus, and often when you just palpate the fetal head, sometimes it might wake up. And as I'm saying, there are many other recipes that people use. You can give the mother a glucose drink, a high concentration glucose drink, and when the baby's fetus's blood glucose levels are also going up, it wakes it up as well. Now, we've said that the normal baseline variability, the normal values are between 5 and 25. Reduced variability is less than 5. And that is now, if it's in a sleep-wake normal cycle, we know that that is normal. If it's otherwise reduced, it's a non-reassuring feature. It tells us that there's something not well, and that might be because of a lack of oxygen, because as we've said, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system needs oxygen to interact with each other. So if there's a lack of variability, we must make sure whether it's a sleep period or not, and otherwise it might be because of hypoxia. We will later on also see, when we do the abnormal fetal heart patterns, that it might also be to some sedation or analgesics, which suppresses the maternal nervous system, will also obviously suppress the fetal nervous system. If the variability, we've said that if the variability is between, if there's decreased variability between 30 and 50 minutes, it's a non-reassuring feature. If it's for longer than 50 minutes, it tells us now it's definitely abnormal. The fetus is not asleep anymore. We must see what's going on here. Now, excessive variability, where the variability is above 25 beats per minute, is also not normal. And if it lasts longer than 15 to 25 minutes, it's suspicious. And if it's longer than 25 minutes, it's abnormal. And we will definitely come back to this again when we do the abnormal fetal heart rates. Now, a very, very important aspect about the baseline variability is a good, stable baseline between 110 and 160 beats per minute, and a reassuring baseline variability, which tells us there's good variability, usually say to us that this is a normal acting autonomic nervous system, both sympathetic and parasympathetic, and that the fetus is not getting being hypoxia. This hypoxia is highly unlikely. And if there are accelerations then present as well, we're even happier. So good variability is always a good sign for us. And that is then the end of lesson 5. Remember all the things that I taught you about the normal baseline, about the normal variability. Again, we're going to use them over and over and over again, especially when we come to the abnormal CTGs, which we will do in lesson 6.